Okay, so the whole trick with this, you guys, is learning these tools but knowing when to use them and how not to overuse them, okay? So one of them that's really handy is the dodge tool, okay? And you can see if I come in here, let's look over here. It's kind of hard to see. I'm going to put it up higher. I want to put it on shadows. And if you can see that, it's starting to lighten that up. So basically what it does is wherever I brush over, it's going to lighten that up, okay? Now, a lot of people, what they do is they think that that's the right tool for certain things, and it'll look really bad if you do it wrong. Just overuse it, okay? It's hard to see this on here. Let's go to it. There, you can see it better here, right there. See how it's lightening all that up? Okay, now in certain cases with what we're doing right now, you're going to need that, okay? Now the opposite of that is here is the burn tool, which will darken things up. Okay, now here's what happens with this, where it's darkening things up. Now if you look over, it's hard to see on the screen, but if I darken this thing up, it just doesn't work. It's blurring out all my detail, or it's burying all my detail, okay? So you just got to use it selectively. Now, just like every other tool we use in here, when I switch to this tool, I get my kind of quick go-to stuff right here, okay? So one is exposure, and it's got a slider here. What that basically means is how much of that effect is going to happen. I tend to pull it down and build. I do that kind of with everything. And then it has what it's going to affect, shadows, midtones, or highlights. So sometimes if you're using it, you go, it's not doing anything. It might be because you've got it on dark and you're trying to do a really light value thing or something like that, okay? And they both kind of work the same. That's that one. And this one has the same thing. Highlights, midtone shadows, exposure, which is how strong it is. Those are the main ones we need to remember. And then we can come in here and adjust our brush. So if we want a nice soft brush, when using this a lot of times that's a good idea, then I would take this slider right here with my brush and I just soften it up. Does that make sense, correct? Okay. And we'll start using them today so it'll make more sense as we go. Another one that's good for this kind of thing is right here, and it's right above what we just did, the blur tool. I'm going to make this a little bigger. So sometimes, especially with portraits, if we took a portrait and we clip that out, or it could be an animal or something organic, I'm not going to want it to be a hard edge everywhere, because then what you're going to get is it's going to look like a collage, just a hard cutout collage. And a lot of times you do little tricks like with portraits, even if it's not, soft focus tends to mean it's further away. So a lot of times what you do with a portrait is that hair back here, you do it when you're painting. You'll soften that whole line back here, and it just softens it up and it pulls this forward, okay? So in this even, I might go, this is really, let's see. Now again, when I switch to this blur tool, and always make sure this is on normal. This is another thing, and I'm going to talk about layer blends in a second here. If you go on, whether it's with a brush or a tool or anything you use, and it's not doing anything, what's the first thing we do? We make sure we don't have a selection, some little tiny selection. We just go deselect, okay? Because a lot of times that's what it is. Another thing what it'll be is sometimes this will flip to an overlay, and it'll make more sense in a second when I talk about this. Check that too if something's not working. Okay, so this blur tool is it's a selective blur tool. And we'll talk about effects and things later on, but if I go to blur, the filter, it's going to blur the entire image equally. See that? What this does is it lets me paint a blur wherever I want. So if I wanted to soften this right there, and again, it's hard to see up there, and I can do the same thing here, strength. How much of it do I want? And I probably would soften this edge right here, just because it's so hard edge. I just probably really selectively soften it. So just remember the blur tool is for you when you want to select a little area and give it a little soft edge. Your blur filter, which we'll talk about later, is going to be when you want to affect the whole image. Now, I'm going to get rid of this one for a second. I'm going to go back to this. So I'm going to make a new layer here. And I'm going to fill it with, let's say, red. So I've got a foreground swatch here of red. I've got an empty layer. I'm going to fill it. Now, in your layers palette, right here is your overlay, is all your overlays. What that means is when I have a layer on top of another layer, the overlays are going to affect that layer underneath it based on what's on this one. I know that sounds weird. And the reason I can't go through this and go, this layer blend will do this, and this layer blend will do this, and this layer, because whatever's underneath that layer is what affects everything. So it kind of actually changes. Does that make sense? It will as you're using them. So we have a red overlay right here, or a red layer. So I'm going to go here. Right now it's on normal, which means there's nothing happening to it. Then I'm going to come down here. Let's try multiply. Okay, so it instantly gives it a monochromatic reddish overlay. If I was going to do a post-apocalyptic illustration, I'd probably start there, and then I'd build. Now, I'm going to just flip through these, some of these. That is color burn. Now, you see what it's doing, how it's selectively letting certain things come through, and then it affects those colors. This is going to be really valuable to you actually on the next project. And by the way, you can probably see when you do things like this, like if I took a picture of a montage couple of heads, like, you know, beauty shots, and then I throw that over it, you have almost every movie poster you're seeing right now. Mm-hmm. They always do this overlay thing, and they monochromatic everything out, and then they do the montage of the stars, and then down at the bottom there's the ship that they're gonna, you know, that is involved in the thing down here, and all the big heads, right? And they always do an overlay over it. It's just one of the standard things that, and I get why they do it. And why do they do that? Because it works. It works, okay? So let's go through a couple of these. Now, some of them just won't work at all, okay? This is why, at least for me in my brain, I can't sit here and just go, oh, that's going to be a color burn. I have to go through them real quick. Now, I know multiply really well because I use multiply from a painting perspective, like a digital painting perspective, so I know that one a little better. It just gets rid of the white for me, okay? This one right here is kind of interesting. Let's use this. So it's just sort of tinting the whole thing, which is kind of nice. Now, a good place to start with this, like when we start the next project, a good place to start, and you'll see that, is to start playing with these right off the bat, right? And just start to see if you can get kind of a cool, moody thing. I used to be like, oh, you're just screwing around and you're trying that. But it's the same thing as when you're doing a traditional piece. There's a lot of it's just happy accidents, you know? So this is kind of, for me, the equivalent, okay? Now, I could probably go, that one right there is kind of interesting too. That's interesting, because now it's turned to sort of black and white, but just keeping a hint of that red to it. But if I took, let's say, let's try this. I want to put this back to normal. And I'm going to fill it now with this blue. So now let's try something here. So if I wanted to turn this into an instant night shot, I could start here. Let's get some. And I could get, I don't know, I'm just going to pick a color. And I'm going to knock back the opacity a little bit. I'm going to put another layer on here. And I could start to make things glow pretty easily. I could come up here and get a really heavy-duty red. And I could do that helicopter landing thing up here. So on and so forth, right? And I could pretty quickly make that a night scene. I could pop a helicopter in there, have it landing, put a spotlight, boom, I've got a dramatic night scene, okay? I've got the start of my movie poster, let's say. Really simple. Now, how that relates to this is what we're looking at here. Like, look at this whole section right here. Okay, so the part of the problem you're having with this photo is that this guy was too close and he used a flash. So there's this blown out whole section here that we have to deal with. Now, one of the things you got to do first, you got to take your clone tool in here. I would make a selection here. I actually probably wouldn't use a clone tool here. I'd probably just use a brush. So let's just use a brush real quick. And make another layer. I'm going to pull the opacity of my brush down. I'm going to grab this surrounding color. I'm just going to kind of get rid of this stuff. And the reason I made a selection is that way it keeps me inside of my area. Now, another thing I noticed is this little line right here feels to me like it should continue. So something I might do is come in here and just continue that line. Okay, so when I pull it back, that just feels like more of a complete, simple idea. But there's a couple things you got to know, and you'll start getting intuitive with this, okay? It takes a little while with Photoshop if you've never been in it. It's not a very intuitive program until you're pretty familiar with it, okay? So if I was looking at this area, and I'm just going to make a real bad selection here. If I was dealing with this area, I got to knock this back. It's way too blown out. So let's say if I come all the way down to here. One thing I might be able to do is get a gray value. I'm going to fill this shape. And then I'm going to try, now this is something where I kind of go out and go, I'm going to try this. It might not work. I might have to take a different approach. Okay, so you can see how that's starting to knock that down. Do you see that? Now, I'm keeping all my information. Why? Because that's just an overlay. So it literally does what it says. It overlays on top of that and lets all my information show through, which is a really handy tool for a whole bunch of stuff. So I might do that. I'd clean up all this schmutz right here. And then remember, you got to clean, if you're doing your stamp tool on here and to clean up this schmutz right here, you got to be on that layer, the camera layer. You got to be on the layer that you're using that tool on. Another place I could use this overlay idea, and I used a gray. And this is actually linear burn. I just know that grays are neutral, and if I'm putting them over sort of a neutral color as an overlay, they'll kind of lay over it as a neutral, which is kind of what I want, because I don't want it to color affect that image, okay? Another bad selection. And then I just want to talk about gradients real quick. So I'm going to make a selection. Because this is a really dirty mess right here. You can see it right here. It's real worn. So let's get another, let's go back to this. And let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of that. Oops. Let's get rid of that. Now, okay, I have an empty layer again. I'm going to select all, which is under, where is select all? It's Command A. I'll get you where it is in a minute. I'm so used to hotkeys, sometimes I forget where the things live, but I want you to know where they live. I'm going to go right here. Okay, so the main things I want you to remember today are dodge, burn, blur tool, overlays, and now gradient. Okay, and a gradient is exactly what it says. So I'm going to grab this tool right here, and then right up here, just like everything else, right here, it drops down to all the different types of gradients I can do. And this second one is the color, and then it goes to nothing. Okay, so right now, I know it's hard to see it. Well, you can see it a little bit over there. So I'm going to change that color again to, let's pick another blue. So now see how it's showing blue to that checkerboard pattern, which means you're looking through it to nothing. And now I'm just going to go here, and I'm just going to drag it. And it just gives me a nice gradient. Okay? I want you to play around with that a little bit today. And how it relates to this, this is I have this selection, I have this layer over it. So now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take a little darker value gray. I'm going to grab my gradient, and it goes color to nothing. And I'm going to pull it over here. And then I'm going to try and find an overlay that works. That's starting to work. Do you see that? So see how it cleaned all that up? Makes my job a lot easier. What we're always trying to do when this is all, for me, this is all how you would work commercially, okay? When you're talking about working commercially and probably even at home, you want to work as lazily as possible, which means you want to make this job you want to be as smart about how you approach it as possible. And part of the reason I say that, I don't think I mentioned that in here. When I started teaching Illustrator in here, I can't teach a class just from the perspective of how I do it. It's not fair to the students, okay? Old dog, new tricks kind of thing, right? And there's been a million times where because everybody knows something, everybody in this room knows something about Photoshop I don't know, or Illustrator, or whatever. They got some trick, right? There's been a million, and when you're in the commercial world, there's a million, your deadlines are insane, okay? And there's been a bunch of times where I might have hired a new intern, and I'll be doing something at 5 o'clock and cursing about it because I'm going to be stuck there late. And they'll go, why don't you do it like this? I don't have time for that right now. I just got to do this. And then I'm there for 5 hours. And the thing that he would have told me in 5 minutes would have meant I was out of there in 15 minutes. And it's the thing I learned when I came in here and I started really diving into it. I've been using Illustrator forever. It's one of my favorite programs. And I'm really good at it. And when I came in here and started looking, there was a billion tools in there I'd never even touched. And there was a million times in my head where I went, oh, that night when I was there all night, I could have been out of there in 5 minutes. Because I just wasn't working as smart as I should, okay? So we always want to work as smart as we can. And sometimes, and the other thing is, don't be afraid to abandon something. If that overlay thing doesn't work, try a different approach. I'm trying to get you guys to start using the tools in real time so you start learning how to think through them. That's really important, okay? I can't just sit here and go, give you a tutorial with a step-by-step. You will not remember that, okay? Because you're not working with the tools and solving problems. You have to become problem solvers. That's all design is, by the way, okay? Does that all make sense? Okay, so let's try it.